I'd now like to welcome to the floor our next speaker, Daniel Haders II, a healthcare investor and operator at Sway Ventures, who will be sharing his vision of why the future of pharma is AI. Daniel, a pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Appreciate the introduction. As mentioned, I'm an operating partner for digital health at Sway Ventures, a venture capital firm, a managing director for digital health at NextCube, which is an early stage investor and accelerator, and just assumed the role of CEO at Model Medicines, which is very prescient for today's discussion. So I'm going to be talking about the future of pharma, and specifically the future of pharma being AI when it comes to drug discovery. So, you know, as we all know, this is one heck of a time to be alive. To put it in some perspective, the human take of COVID-19 is that this is the worst global healthcare crisis in at least 40 years since the onset of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, but probably more appropriately 100 years since the Spanish flu. The social take of COVID-19 is that, at least here in the US, we sit in the midst of the greatest US civil rights movement in at least 50 years as well. The financial take of COVID-19 is that we've endured the worst economic crisis in at least the last 10 years since the Great Recession, but probably more appropriately the last 90 years, meaning the Great Depression. But of course, with great crises come great opportunity. And the digital health take of COVID-19 is that we sit squarely in the middle of the greatest population health opportunity in at least 160 years since we really started to understand the power of clean drinking water for public health, or probably maybe even more appropriately 220 years since the invention of the smallpox vaccine. And this revolution that we're a part of today is based on something different though. So for the first time since the advent of clean water and vaccines, we have the opportunity to reduce costs and improve outcomes in healthcare all at the same time because of artificial intelligence and data. Now, some people may say, well, what's the big deal? You're talking about your 2 bullet points, reducing costs and improving outcomes. Where the truth of the matter is that whenever there's a new method to discover drugs or bring them to market, or any new healthcare technology that's been brought online, when those technologies are brought online, they say that they're going to reduce costs and improve outcomes. But the truth of the matter is, other than things like surgical masks and clean water and vaccines, the numbers just don't prove that to be true. New medical technologies, whether they be pharmaceuticals, whether they be other types of medical technologies, when they improve outcomes, they also increase costs. Or when they reduce costs, they don't actually improve outcomes. And that's what the data has told us time and time again, no matter what any single company may say about any single product. So we all understand that the current approach to drug discovery is broken beyond, maybe beyond salvaging, at least from the traditional approaches, right? It takes over 10 years on average to bring a new drug from discovery to the pharmacy. And it costs, on average, $2.5 billion to run that same process, including hard costs and opportunity costs. And why is that the case? Well, it's the case because only 3 drugs that start in discovery make it all the way to the pharmacy, right? We're talking less than 0.015% of drugs make that journey. And so when that is your hit rate, when that is the efficiency of your R&D, that's why it takes 10 years and $2.5 billion. But what does this mean specifically? In reality, what this means is that there are 350 drugs failing in late-stage clinical trials every year, typically. And when you take a number like 350 drugs, and you're talking about development costs that are on the orders of billions, you can see that there's potentially $500 billion in terms of hard cash losses and opportunity cash losses in failures every single year in the drug development space. And this shows it even more why it's a broken system, right? Here's a headline from a few years ago that shows that the real IRR on pharma R&D is going negative, right? It's on its way to negative. In this case, this particular study indicated that last year, based on trends, that we may have hit that 0% IRR number. The failure rates are high and IRR is low because traditional drug discovery and development is neither repeatable nor able to utilize the totality of chemistry and biological knowledge, right? We have an industry that drives or controls a huge portion of GDP and healthcare spend and quite a large portion of our lives, and determines, in many cases, how long our lives are or how well we spend the time that we have. And the truth of the matter is, it's simply not repeatable. What other industry could exist this long without creating repeatable, scalable processes to create their products? And also what's important to double down on here is that the way that pharmaceutical development is done today oftentimes is not hypothesis-driven science, as you may like to think that it is. Many times it's driven by things like high throughput screening or simply serendipity that leads to the drugs that may be life-saving or life-changing drugs. But this is no way to run an industry, right? This is no way to grow a company. However, repeatability and utilization of large data sets is what artificial intelligence and data science was created for. AI and data science is now at the beginning of ushering in the next revolution in drug discovery. And as you can see in this slide here, there's been a number of epochs in the development of the pharmaceutical industry. So you have names that either, in their current name or existed way back in the 1800s that many of us are familiar with. And then as those companies started to grow, we started to see the industrialization of the pharmaceutical industry, right? The same principles that were being used in factories or scaling up manufacturing started to be used, and you saw a new generation of pharmaceutical companies develop. Then in the 1970s and 80s, you started the biopharma revolution, which was definitely a revolution. But in retrospect, what we really did, we didn't figure out a way to reduce costs. What in fact we did is figure out a new way to discover drugs. And did we discover drugs? Of course. Some of the most globally healthcare changing drugs, these large molecule drugs that we couldn't have even dreamed about in the 40s or 50s, have now come to change people's lives the world over. However, just because we discovered a new way to discover drugs didn't mean that we discovered a new way to make that process repeatable. And we certainly didn't take costs out of the system, as all of us know by the headlines, mostly negative, about the cost, especially of large molecule therapeutic interventions. Moving forward to there, we got into robotics-assisted drug discovery. And so this is really where high throughput screening started coming. We realized that if we couldn't create hypothesis-driven research to repeatedly discover drugs, potentially through brute force methods, right? Tiny wells, as many of them as we could pack on the plates, robotic systems that could run 24/7 and allow us to do a massive amount of experimentation to supplement our inability to do hypothesis-driven research and to effectively capitalize on the compendium of chemistry and biology data that we have spent the last decades and centuries building. And that was a revolution in its own right. And now we sit squarely in the middle of the genomics-based revolution, right? And of course, all of us, or I'm sure many of us on the call, are recipients of RNA-based, mRNA-based therapeutics to combat COVID-19, right? And so we're all becoming beneficiaries of this. But once again, we've discovered a new way to deliver therapeutic, to create therapeutics, but we haven't necessarily created a new repeatable low-cost way to do it. So where do we go from here? This is where AI-driven drug discovery comes in. To understand AI drug discovery, you need to start with the data. And there's primarily 6 types of data that AI drug discovery companies start with. Text-based approaches, which is literally oftentimes where you're pulling information, say from the literature. These are often big data, NLP-based approaches to identifying inferences and sentiment analysis within documents to make connections from a big data point of view that humans haven't been able to make. Cellular-based data, ADMET-based data, genetics-based data, protein-based data, and chemistry-based data are all now being used as well. And these are different versions of either chemistry or protein or biology-based information that now, because we can either have publicly available data sets with enough data points to make them useful, or we're able to create proprietary data sets, we're able now to leverage this data, transform it, clean it, parse it, and feed it into algorithms that are then able to take that data and discover the next generation of drugs. Why is this important? And I keep on coming back to this point. When these algorithms ingest this data, they're ingesting the compendium of all of the experiments from all of the bench scientists through all of history that have done all this work, that have published all this data in peer-reviewed literature. And it's creating databases and it's creating algorithms that are able to learn from decades and decades and decades of experimentation in a way that humans simply are not able to. And what happens when you're able to learn from all the experiments of history and through experiments from different points of view, i.e. a chemistry point of view, a protein, a genetics, cellular, ADMET, whatever it might be? What you're able to do is you're able to create a repeatable process, or at least you're able to know what not to do. And oftentimes when you're doing discovery work, learning what not to do and being able to cross off 99.9% of the white space is just as important as knowing where to look and what to do, right? And that's what these data sources allow us to do. And that's what AI and data science allow us to do when we utilize these decades and centuries of chemistry and biology-based information that we now have. So how does repeatability and data utilization change the business model of pharma, though? Well, you can see it in these J curves here. So the curve that you see on the furthest to the right here, this is a typical successful approval process. And you get a sense of how much cost here, right, and how much time here goes into creating a product versus how much time is available to create how much revenue after a drug is approved. And what you'll see is a long amount of time and a lot of costs are sunk into a short period of time for pharma companies to generate revenue. And hence, this is why drug prices oftentimes are considered to be out of control. But with AI and with data science, we can drive these curves to the left. And when we drive curves to the left, that fundamentally changes the business of pharmaceutical development. If you drive it all the way to the left, as you can see in this darker line here, and you can imagine a world that's just a handful of years and maybe tens of millions of dollars to bring a drug to market versus 10 or more years and billions of dollars to bring a drug to market, you fundamentally change the diseases that you can go after, the targets that you can interrogate, and the prices, frankly, that you need to charge to recoup your investment. And this changes the industry. And this is also important, right? A lot of people get tied up with the idea of AI, and they focus on the AI. But typically, in all businesses, and especially in the pharma business, the problem that you're trying to solve has nothing directly to do with AI. It's a business problem. And this is where the product market fit for AI and data science in the pharmaceutical industry is so good, right? These 5 factors are what keep pharma CEOs up all night, right? Return on R&D investment, the efficiency of their discovery, the robustness of their pipeline, the diversification across targets, indication families, and the speed to market. AI and data science can and has started to drive efficiencies and top decile type results across all of these factors for the industry. So does it actually work though? So selfishly, this is a chart created from some work that Model Medicines has been doing recently. Model Medicines created a platform that the company calls the ChemPrint platform and has been working in the COVID-19 infectious disease drug discovery process since the virus hit the shores of the US. And what you see here in this chart is the hit rate for in vitro validated drug discoveries, comparing the literature of Dittmar et al. And Yang et al. And Chen et al. Versus, say, a tier one of the best institutes in the world at executing high throughput screening drug discovery, that being Scripps Research, versus what Model Medicines has been able to achieve in combination with Scripps Research. What you see here on the left is this quote from Arnav Chaudhary, VP of Medicinal Chemistry at Caliber. And what we have found is that this partnership that we have with Scripps has demonstrated that integrating artificial intelligence and machine learning models into traditional HTS drug discovery can significantly improve the efficacy of drug discoveries. And these results show an order of magnitude change in the efficiency of drug discovery when AI is added into the mix. But it isn't something, of course, that's just happening at Model Medicines. As we all know, there's a number of companies. And so it's also starting to happen in the clinic. This is a recent headline for last year with an AI drug discovery, an AI designed drug entering human clinical trials for the first time. So it's not just something that's happening in one place. This is happening across the industry. The tidal wave is coming. But now, does the market agree? And so here we look, this is from Rock Health, and I know there's some results that you guys were shown previously. But in this assessment, investment by American VC funds into research and development-based digital health companies, i.e. the Valos and Citros and Silicos, Model Medicines, Recursions of the world, it was the #1 funded value proposition in the first half of this year. And that was because of COVID, and it was because of a realization that the pharmaceutical industry needs to change. Also, though, we've seen it on the public markets with either IPOs or the announcement of IPOs or SPACs, companies like Recursion, Valo, and Excentia, and very successful fundraising from companies like Helix and Atomwise as well. But it's not just that these companies are starting to show results. It's not just that they're gaining funding, but they're also doing drug discovery deals, indicated by this chart here. Schrodinger with BMS, Recursion with Bayer, in silico with Pfizer, and in Citro with Gilead and BMS as well. And these deals show that in the research labs of large strategic pharma companies, that this is gaining traction. So it's not just a VC story. It's not just a public market story. It's not just a clinical or a scientific story. It's a business story as well now. I hope you guys have seen from what I've showed you today that the future of pharma truly is AI. And I look forward to answering some questions after the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel. I quite appreciated the high level takeaways from your presentation and sort of a global view in terms of global population health, long-term history of healthcare, et cetera, in addition to its many more particular specific insights, et cetera. So thank you.